there's lots of opportunity for decisive action. The idea that action and awareness are the same thing. One firefighter told me a story about how she was sitting in a restaurant, and out of the corner of her eye, she saw a little boy choking. And she said she doesn't remember going from her table to that little boy's table. And she had saved him before she realized she had moved. That's the idea that awareness and action become one.
Welcome to the Pivoting Wolf. Open conversations with interesting people from varying backgrounds across several different countries around the world. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Rhonda Harris with White Wolf Consulting, and this is another episode of The Pivoting Wolf. Today, I'm speaking with Dr. Judith Glick-Smith, author of Flow-Based Leadership, What the Best Firefighters Can Teach You About Leadership and Making Hard Decisions, which was #1 on Fire Chief Magazine's top 9 public safety leadership books. Dr. Glick-Smith, or Judy, has had a tremendous career with over 40 years experience as a technical communication expert, knowledge architect, leadership development consultant, and entrepreneur. In her personal life, she enjoys drawing, painting, and has played piano her entire life. An interesting detail I learned about Judy is that she and her 3-year-old English Cocker Spaniel Kirby are learning American Sign Language together. Judy lives in the suburbs north of Atlanta near her daughter, 2 granddaughters, and 2 great-grandchildren. Judy, welcome to the Pivoting Wolf, and thank you for joining me today to talk about some of your most pivotal moments. Let's jump right in. In your questionnaire, you wrote, "My whole life has been a pivot." Can we start with that as a lead-in, and as you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. So by that, I mean, I've always practiced a process of reinvention in my adult life because I have so many interests. Being an entrepreneur, most entrepreneurs are very, it's like squirrel and then squirrel and then squirrel. So there's this idea of not being able to be focused on any one thing because so many things look interesting. So early in my career, I read 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I also had a grandfather. My grandfather was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize in 1981. And he mentioned to me that if he had written his whole life story in advance, he would have gotten a lot more done. And that made an impression on me. So I came up with a process for myself to write my life story in advance. And I live by that process. So, but things happen. And so even though you write your life story, which is a future-oriented activity, the present comes in and smacks you upside the head, and you have to make decisions on how are you gonna proceed from here, given these set of circumstances. So, I mean, I've always done exactly what I wanted to do, whether it was good for me or not. But I knew I wanted to own my own business. But so I started my own business in 1983 as a contract technical writer. In 1987, I moved to Dallas, Texas with my now ex-husband, and he worked for IBM, so we got moved out there. And I started a technical writing business in Dallas and grew it to 25 people. And during that time, there were lots of pivots because we had a focus, but where we were documenting systems for technical people, programmers in a maintenance environment, but always there were opportunities to do other types of documentation, regulatory, user documentation, training, testing, all those ancillary things that come around that are there in the systems world. So the temptation was to go off on a tangent quite often, and I had to rein it back in. And that process that I had come up with is how I managed to stay focused. So pivot to me is, and the basis for this process that I use is my mission statement. And what I found is most people do not have a mission statement written down. And 7 Habits of Highly Effective People has a wonderful exercise in it that tells you how to do it. It's not easy, but once you solidify it, my mission statement that I wrote in 1987 is exactly the same today. I had breast cancer in 1995, and I looked at it again and I'm going like, yep, that's it. But it became more urgent at that point. And now that my breast cancer has come back, it has become even more urgent. But the actual mission itself has not changed. So when you pivot, how that works, if you remember when you're a little girl or a little boy and you're out playing with your kids and you're twirling, do you ever twirl? You learn real quickly if you focus on a point and you twirl, you can maintain your stability.
Oh, that's a very good analogy.
Down. Yeah.
That's a fantastic analogy. Do you mind sharing what is your mission statement?
To live my life collaboratively, in love and integrity, and to impact as many people in the world positively as I can.
That's fantastic.
One sentence. One sentence. Mission, people think they have to write these long mission statements. It should be your personal elevator speech that you can tell somebody between 2 floors in an elevator.
So it sounds like this mission statement, and you know, when you talked about spinning, is life can spin out of control. But if you focus on the focal point and, you know, like you said, that keeps you from falling down. So I really like that analogy that you shared, because I do agree with you that a mission statement is very important. And it's interesting to me. A lot of people don't think that way because, you know, I think that in society, particularly in the business world, you hear a lot of companies talking about their mission statement. You know, I rarely hear people speak on that in an individual capacity. And I think that's an unfortunate thing because I share that sentiment with you that, you know, if you have a particular mission statement and you know who you are and what your hubris is, you know, it can keep you grounded. It can keep you from falling down, you know, no matter how out of control things can spin at times. So I think that's very, very important that you mention that. And more specifically, even as you pivot, like you've described, you mentioned, you know, moving to Texas, you had this this new business, and you know, there were a lot of opportunities to do different things. So I think the really key element that I want to emphasize from what you said is that despite all the pivoting that we'll do throughout our lifetimes, that mission statement is like the golden thread. I use this phrase, the golden thread, like it just weaves through everything. And like it's like the beacon, right? You could be on all kinds of different journeys, but as long as your actions, your pivots, whatever you're going through are aligned with your mission statement, then that's a very powerful thing that can keep you from spinning out into some other place that's not aligned with what your values are and how you choose to live your life. So I really appreciate you getting right into that. Thank you for that.
That it becomes a decision-making tool.
Mm-hmm.
Because if it doesn't align, if you have a decision to make, if it does not align with your mission, you have a really easy decision to make.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that doesn't mean you're not going to have hard decisions. But it does
Right.
ground you and help you stay focused. So, and the other thing I wanted to bring up is the idea. Now, when I got my PhD, the program was a transdisciplinary program. So I was allowed to look at any discipline to inform my question, and my question was on decision making.
Mm-hmm.
And there, in the world of transformation in the literature, particularly with regard to I looked at quantum physics, I looked at transformation, I looked at a lot of different things. In quantum physics, we have the idea of a bifurcation. So if you think about when water is about to boil and become steam, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
there is what happens in the molecules of the water is it becomes really hyper agitated, but just before it turns into steam, all of the molecules line up, and that is a bifurcation point. Okay, so there are social scientists out there, such as Erwin Laszlo, who have studied bifurcation in the context of human and social structures. And he identified 3 different bifurcations. So we have T bifurcations, which are triggered by the relentless advance of modern technology.
Mm-hmm.
C bifurcations, the letter C bifurcations, which are triggered by conflict, and E bifurcations, which are triggered by economic conditions. And in my mind, we have 2 more that you can consciously use in your own life. One is, or that can happen to you, or that you can use to your advantage. One is an F as in Frank bifurcation, which is triggered by conditions beyond your control. For example, my breast cancer diagnosis in 1995, or COVID-19 when we all had to shut down. That's an F bifurcation. But then there is the P as in Paul bifurcation, where it's proactively triggered by you. It's triggered by the individual, and they are consciousness-based bifurcations. So you can take control as much as you can, because stuff happens. You know, that that process that I was telling you about earlier is called strategic planning for your life. I do workshops on that. And it teaches a way to implement P bifurcations in your life, anchored in that mission statement. So
that is incredibly interesting. And I am so glad that you shared that, because as long as I've known you, we haven't had this kind of a conversation before. And when I was listening to you speak about that, it reminded me of, similar trends when I'm working myself with people who are navigating change, right? So I found it quite interesting when you were talking about, the point before which water is boiling and all these things line up. And then you switch to talk about the bifurcation and the different aspects. And so, of course, I'm thinking philosophically, what does that mean on an individual level? I know you're talking quite a bit about, from a scientific perspective, but I find it quite interesting when people come to their quote unquote boiling point, right?
Mhm.
So this can come about from the different aspects, things that are outside of our control, or it could be things that we bring upon ourselves. We desire to change,
Right.
or there's a certain friction that's happening, and tying that back to the mission statement. I think it just emphasizes the importance even more to have that baseline, that foundational mission statement, because clearly we're going to have circumstances in our lives that are things that we bring upon ourselves, things that are outside of our control, and all of the other things that you talked about. But, to what degree are we going to be able to be resilient and face these challenges before we reach our, proverbial boiling point? When you talked about water, and, water changes, it can become steam, and it can boil, or it can also, which you didn't mention this, but I'm thinking the other state of water is frozen,
Right.
Being frozen. Right. So on a molecular level, there have to be people, leadership, mission statement, making these hard decisions. I find that quite fascinating. It's very interesting to me. I like to align these types of scientific items metaphorically when talking about things that happen in the human experience. I find that quite fascinating, to find those similarities. So there, one is very scientific, the other one is, kind of social sciences kind of thing. But, in large, it's interesting to see how these things can be very similar, but even though they're technically a little bit different.
Go ahead.
I'm just fascinated about the title of your book, when you talk about leadership, and I know all of the work that you've done with the smoke divers and these hard decisions that you talk about, and I'm hearing you, talk about your work. How did you come up with the basis for your book? I mean, is it a good time to kind of pull that in, or
yeah, I was about to do that. Let me make a little transition for you.
Yeah. Okay.
So here we have this idea of a mission. We have an idea of planning your life so that you can hit those pivot moments head on, and create a new place for yourself when those moments happen. But bottom line, it comes down to how do you feel? How do you feel in the moment? Okay. So I'm going to back up a little bit and give you some background. In 2000, I had it on my goals list that I wanted to have my PhD before I turned 60. Okay. And I was 55. And I thought, well, I better get busy. So I found the California Institute of Integral Studies, which was had this PhD program in transformation. And I was interested in decision making. Being in IT all these years, I have seen really bad decisions, and I'm going like, why do people make those decisions? It doesn't make sense. So as I was running down the rabbit holes of the literature on transformation, I discovered this idea of flow, which comes out of the discipline of positive psychology. And it has been very well researched by a number of researchers, but the most famous is Csikszentmihalyi.
Yes, I've read that book.
Yeah. So, and in that book, he describes the process that he actually quantified flow, where I won't get into the methodology, but he came up with, because he was able to do that, he was able to identify the characteristics of flow. And I was talking to my brother-in-law about this when I was excited and telling him what I had found. And he is a retired battalion chief from Prince William County Fire Rescue. And he stopped me when I was giving him these characteristics, and he said, let me tell you a story.
Mhm.
And he told me a story about a line of duty death where he had to make the call to not rescue the firefighter. And I realized all of the characteristics of flow were in his decision-making process. And
Oh, okay.
so I went back to my committee and I said, I want to look at firefighters, the flow experiences of firefighters in the midst of a critical decision to see, to answer the question, does being in a flow state facilitate decision-making? And my committee was excited. They told me interview 8 men and 8 women, 8 firefighters, 16 firefighters, 8 men and 8 women. They wanted to make sure there was no gender difference.
Mhm.
And there wasn't. And then I interviewed them. I collected 49 stories. I would start by giving them the characteristics of flow, and I could visibly see them jumping out of their skin to tell me stories. And I collected 49 stories. I analyzed the heck out of them for 2 years, wrote my dissertation, and published in November of 2011. I defended 2 weeks before my 60th birthday, so I won.
So you really live by the I do what I want to do notion that we open this interview with, and I absolutely love that. Do you mind if I just interject just for a moment here, because I really want to articulate on the meaning of flow. And the reason why is because, as you may know, I think when people think of, particularly for people who may not have read that book, which I read that book in college, the term is used loosely, right? Oh, I'm in the flow of things. You know, it's kind of this kind of sometimes treated kind of in a woo-woo kind of way, but because you're talking about some extremely important decision making while in flow, can you articulate a little bit more for those of us out here who may not have read that book and doesn't understand like necessarily the essence of that work? Because saying, oh, I'm in the flow, it can be used very lightly, but I know this body of work is extremely important. And when I'm thinking about what you just said, someone has to make a decision to not save someone. What is going on in that moment, right? So I kind of wanted to dig a little bit deeper into that, if you didn't mind sharing.
Sure.
More about that.
Flow is a state where you're working toward clear goals and you're receiving feedback in the moment very quickly to make you feel like you are on the right path.
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of opportunity for decisive action. The idea that action and awareness are the same thing. One firefighter told me a story about how she was sitting in a restaurant and out of the corner of her eye, she saw a little boy choking. And she said she doesn't remember going from her table to that little boy's table. And she had saved him before she realized she had moved. That's the idea that awareness and action become one. You concentrate on the task at hand, but not in a tunnel vision way. I only had one firefighter that told me he felt like he was in tunnel vision when he was in flow. Most of them told me they had hypervision. They were totally aware of everything going on around them while being able to concentrate on the task at hand. There's a loss of sense of self. Your frontal lobe actually cuts off so that your mind actually is outward and not turned inward. You have a sense of control. You might not be in control, according to Csikszentmihalyi, but you have a sense of being in control. Time morphs. There's temporal distortion. So you might feel like time isn't moving. You
Mhm.
might feel like it's in slow motion. You might feel like it's moving, but it's distorted. And the last characteristic is that the task that you're doing is autotelic. That means you would do that task no matter what.
Mm.
So that
Is that sort of the kind of phenomenon that we've heard about where you develop superhuman strength when you have to lift a car off of you've heard those stories where people just out of nowhere, they're able to lift a car up off of a child that's underneath, just is it kind
it
of like
would,
that?
but it's coupled with the chemistry in your brain and your
Mhm.
body when that happens.
Right.
And I'm not an expert on the brain science. I'm working my way through that right now on my next book. But there are hormones and chemicals in your body that kick in when you're in a flow state. Now, let me say this about that. There are lots of event-driven conferences and things that you can go to where you can learn how to microdose, or you can learn how to jump off a mountain in a flying suit and be in flow. You don't have to do that.
Mhm.
Flow happens to everybody, unless, Csikszentmihalyi he brings out some people who have certain mental disorders cannot go into flow, but they just physically can't do it. But for the most part, everybody experiences flow from time to time. Flow is a feeling. It is not a thing. It is not negative. It is not positive. It either is or it isn't. It's binary.
Okay.
Either you're in it or you're not. And people talk about team flow. Everyone on a team has to be in flow for there to be team flow. So that's a whole nother conversation, but I want to just throw that out there. So when it comes to the individual, what you want to do is strive to maximize your flow states, because there have been studies that have shown that when you are working in flow, you are up to 500 times more productive. It's crazy. McKinsey did that study. So
Now,
I'm sorry, 500%, 5 times more productive. Right. So plus, now the answer to my question, when I got my PhD, does being in a flow state facilitate decision-making? The answer is yes, but you have to have the correct training and experience in order to be in flow. But you can be a beginner and be in flow as long as because the flow, how it works is it is the intersection of skill and challenge.
right.
So if you have the skill to meet the challenge, you can drop in flow. So think of an activity, if all of y'all out there, think of an activity where you're in flow and you're doing that activity, and all of a sudden something comes at you you've never seen before and you become anxious. Anxiety will pull you out of flow.
Okay.
So go back to that activity, and you're rocking and rolling and you're doing this and you've done it for years and you love it, and all of a sudden it gets boring. Boredom will pull you out of flow.
Right.
So how do you mitigate anxiety and boredom? You do it through increased training, getting more experiences that will introduce new challenges. But they're the consciousness part of this. To be able to stay in flow is to recognize it with situation awareness, that while you're in the flow state, you're paying attention to how you're feeling. It's all about the feeling. And if that feeling wanes, then how do you go about bringing in a new component that will challenge you, that will keep you from getting bored, or
Mhm.
that will mitigate the anxiety that you might be feeling?
Now that I wanted to take what you just said, and I want to go a little bit deeper, and maybe in a little bit of another direction as well. So I know we've talked quite a bit about, this leadership aspect of it. But in light of the individual, particularly since, we're, here with the Pivoting Wolf, what I'm really interested in is, reaching out to people who are faced with a pivot in their lives,
Right.
whether it's career or it's personal or whatever the case may be. So I wanted to kind of shift a little bit and ask you, what kind of advice would you give to someone who might be experiencing, for example, a midlife change? Maybe they're approaching that pre-boiling point moment that you described with the water. I know that, this was one of the questions on the questionnaire, and you answered, knowing your life's mission and purpose, which I completely agree with. And you mentioned the life plan already. And then coming up with a process to keep that plan working and striving to maximize your flow states. So when it comes to maximizing your flow states, you mentioned, if you're a beginner, and I would consider myself maybe to even be kind of a beginner in that regard, because I hate to admit it, but I'm prone to anxiety. Sometimes I get overwhelmed. I overthink things. And I'm also
Rhonda, I have seen you in flow.
Have
I
you?
witnessed you in flow. I have.
Okay.
When you do your photography, you are in flow, girl.
That's true.
That is a flow state that I have witnessed.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for reminding me of that. But I don't necessarily have the opportunity to do that often. And there's other work that I do.
Okay, but that is exactly what you're asking me.
Mm-hmm. Right. So I wanted to ask
being aware of what puts you in a flow state answers the question on the pivot. Right.
So for others who may not necessarily have that, like, I know now that you reminded me, I love doing portrait photography and I'm looking into the camera because there are a lot of people watching this right now who have no idea that I also am a professional portrait photographer, had a studio and all of that. They know me as, learning and performance consultant, change management, blah, blah, this corporate stuff that I do.
And I've seen you in a flow state in that environment.
Right. Yeah.
I know. You in both places.
So here's the thing though. I have multiple passions and it's really frustrating. And that's I think that's where some of my anxiety comes from, is I'm like, oh, look at squirrel. Like I also love to sing and I write songs and I am, constantly learning to play guitar and it's really challenging. It's very, very challenging because when you're, trying to, I think that's even sometimes, and you tell me how you feel about this. I feel that societally speaking, we are often raised to pick one thing, you go to school, do well, blah, blah, go to college, pick a career, chase it, do
it the rest of your life,
live to work. Yeah.
Don't do anything else.
Yeah. And the creative side is just completely ignored. And and it's amazing to me that anybody could even find their way to flow in the midst of all of that kind of, I say it's kind of an indoctrination, if you will.
It is.
It's the easiest word that I can come up with. And I've struggled with that, side note. I don't know if you're aware that I'm a Myers-Briggs and Strong Interest Inventory certified practitioner, and I have a very strange strong interest profile. I have an ACE, the Artistic, Conventional, and Entrepreneur, and the A and the C are they are completely opposed to each other, and I have struggled my entire life. I feel like I'm living there's two people inside of me, and I try to find and stay in flow, but then it's like, oh, well, I want to go paint something. No, I want to go do some corporate stuff.
There
Well,
is
I want to start my fifth business, it's just really.
There is some self-forgiveness that you need to do. Okay, because that's you. I am very much the same way. So and it's taken so long to realize it's okay that I'm like this. So
yeah, I agree
you
with
see
that.
my piano back here?
Yes.
Every night I will go play my piano. I know my mother is just giggling in her grave that I play the piano at night. But sometimes I don't want to. So I'll go outside and I do my research for my next book. And I go outside and sit on the patio and I read. I have quit. I have stopped beating myself up because I like to do all these things. And I am not as driven. I mean, back in the day when I was what you call midlife, I was trying to build a career, make money, whatever, and still do the things I like. And there was so much of it was money driven.
Right.
It made me feel like I couldn't do the things I wanted to do in the moment.
You just really struck a nerve with me, Judy. You really, really struck a nerve with me because you just described a point. I would say that, that's probably been a pivotal moment for me. I'm 55 now. And so I'm feeling like, well, you're ever going to, release those songs, all those 50 songs that you wrote, you're ever going to do that?
Up on yourself.
And I remember a few years ago, before I moved to the Netherlands, I was in this flux state, which I feel like I'm always in some kind of a flux state. And yes, there is this drive to achieve, and, because we have to, we cannot overstate the importance of paying the bills, and, money is definitely, it's a piece of reality. But I remember you giving me this kind of, I'll put it in the category of some tough love. I think it was back in 2018 before I moved here. And you just said, are you just going to do it? Just do it. You were very encouraging. Yeah, and it's weird because I felt like I wasn't able to give myself permission to even entertain the reality that it's okay to be multi-passionate, which is a phrase that's kind of newer to me. I've just begun to hear people use that phrase, multi-passionate, in the last couple of years. So back to the flow piece, and what advice you would give to folks, so the self-forgiveness and permission. I think permission is a big piece that, especially, I want to say, folks of a certain generation might struggle with that. I know myself personally, I didn't come from a generation where you weren't necessarily permitted to be so openly and freely pursuing or being okay with these other multi-passionate things, because like you said, we're so socialized to go after the career and the money and these quote unquote success factors, right?
Right.
And
somebody, and when we talk about that, we're using somebody else's definition of success.
Exactly.
You have to define what is success for you.
Right.
And so maybe it's money, maybe it's not.
Right.
Maybe
yeah. So I'm really fascinated as you're talking about flow. And it's like, well, we can experience flow in all these different types of settings. And even if we could just suspend for a moment, the utility of flow in a practical sense. So if I was a leader of a big corporation or something, I would be interested in, how am I going to get in flow so I can be a better leader, which is fantastic. But in addition to that, what about just for its own sake? How about just for the pure enjoyment of enhancing the joy in your life?
That's it.
Right. So
once you get into the habit of maximizing your flow states everywhere in every aspect of your life, that is what it's all about. I mean, it is just amazing. One thing I want to talk about a little bit with that regard, it is the idea of how do you actually do the transformation into flow.
That's exactly where I wanted you to elaborate on, because I'm sitting here, so my interest is so piqued, and I know I've felt it, but I will have to admit that most of the times it's been quite accidental. For example, at 1 a.m., because I unfortunately don't sleep much. Some of you out there who are watching this who know me know that. I'll grab my guitar, and you talk about the timepiece that becomes, like it doesn't exist. I have literally found myself at 7 a.m.
still playing,
putting the guitar back, and I'm like, wow, what happened? I was just gonna, it'll start like this. I'll hear a song, or I'll think of a song, and I'll say to myself, I wonder if I can teach myself that on the guitar. So I'll open up this app on my phone, guitar tabs. I'll look up the song. I'll grab my guitar just for fun. And of course, I always tell myself it's just going to be a 5-minute exercise. I'm just going to look to see if I can find the chords for that song. Right. And then, okay, I'll find, and then I'll save it into my library. And then I'll be like, I know all these chords by heart. Well, why don't you just grab the guitar and just give it a go? Oh, okay. I'm just only going to do this for like 10 minutes. 5.5, 6 hours later, 15 songs later, because then I'm like, oh, well, I remember this other song that I think I want to learn. And then I'll go back to the other songs that I've practiced, and then I'm singing, and I'm sure the neighbors are like, that American chick is always up at 3 a.m. singing some damn song. Like, I try not to be too loud, but whatever. And then that I know is flow, because I have completely lost all track of time.
Absolutely. And you should just let it be a thing that you loved every moment of it. You didn't have to sell anything. You weren't trying to marketize it. You were just in that moment.
Right.
Flow is present based. So it is just about being in that moment. So,
so like I was saying, that was very accidental, right? So for the person who might, for example,
you did that on purpose.
Maybe so, but I know initially,
maybe not at a conscious level.
Yeah, right. Initially, it wasn't my intent to be up for 6 hours playing guitar until 7 o'clock in the morning. But for individuals who are, for example, really struggling to find their way, they might be having I know it's kind of a cheeky phrase, midlife crisis. They're really trying to figure out what their next move is, what their life plan would be, what is their mission statement. They're really trying to find their passion. Maybe they've just woken up one day and realized, I have not been doing the things that I really like. This just doesn't bring me joy anymore. So for a person who wants to be more deliberate, because I'm feeling like the more often you can find yourself in flow, and if you can be more deliberate about getting yourself into that state, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm of the opinion that the more often that you can do that, the more likely you are to find your passion and then put yourself on a path to be able to more easily write your mission statement, and then followed by creating your life plan around that. So I see kind of a trajectory, and I see flow as being a really important tool to help people get there. What do you think about that?
Well, I would put them two separate buckets. Flow is a feeling. You're trying to make it a thing.
Right.
It isn't something that has to happen before you have a mission.
Okay.
Okay. It is a feeling that you have. Okay. So I actually get in flow when I do my life planning. So it's a separate kind of thing. Flow is not an activity.
Right. Okay.
The activity puts you in a flow state.
Gotcha.
Okay.
But what can we do to consciously and deliberately, approach that state though?
Okay. So what people need to do is to find out what your own flow states are, is pay attention. Situation awareness, that's a term that is in law enforcement and fire and EMS and that kind of thing, where they are conscious of everything going on around them. So when you notice, be situationally aware when you are in a flow state. Ask yourself, what put me here? What's the temperature? Is there music going? Is it quiet? Am I around people? What are the components going on around you while you're in that flow state? And you can do that because when you're in a true flow state, you're hyper aware of everything around you. Okay. So that's number one. You start identifying those moments. This is a practice. It's kind of like yoga. You don't get it right every time. And you're not going to fall into flow every time. But so that's why I call it a practice. But so then let me tell you how you transform into flow once you know these things about yourself. My flow states are different from yours. I would say you and I have a Venn diagram that kind of probably crosses in some areas, but my flow states are not going to be the same as anybody else's in the world. Okay, so you have to figure out what puts you into a flow state. Then to transform into flow, you have to know what you know. Right. That's number one. You know how to do whatever activity it is, and you're confident in that. Okay. That's number one. Number two is that you're focused outward on the world, not on yourself. Okay. The work is, and I don't necessarily mean in service to other people, although that could be. I mean, one firefighter told me that her favorite thing when I said, what puts you in a flow state when you're at home? She said, in the wintertime, it's my succulents. She said, I keep them in my garage, and all I do is open the garage door and I go out and I take care of my succulents. Like yours is playing the guitar at 1 o'clock in the morning. Okay. Yeah. So you're outward focused. You're not focused on Rhonda anymore. You're focused on the music. Okay. So you focus outward. And the third thing is, while you are in the flow state, obstacles come your way. Like in your particular case, you're learning new chords, and you figure out how those chords work. And then how do they work with each other? And how can you put this into a song? Or how can you play this song over here using those chords? Those are the obstacles that are coming your way, and you figure out, and the challenge of that is what keeps you in flow. So there's three things: know what you know, stay outward focused, and work on the obstacles coming your way. That puts you in a flow state and will keep you in a flow state.
Because the challenge is kind of keeps you engaged. Is that yes, the rationale behind that? Because you mentioned the importance of not being bored, and we do need to be challenged, right? Yes. So, okay. Yeah. Because if it's too easy, then there's no friction. And the friction
Exactly.
is, the friction is kind of like when you strike a match, that friction, whoosh, that's where the sparks come from, is when you have a
Right.
little bit, you can't have it too easy, because it's like, there's no,
Right.
I know it's interesting. All these things, all these anomalies that are coming to my mind. Like, we don't build muscle if we don't have weight to lift, right?
Yes, or some kind of
Attention.
attention.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, that is just, I really appreciate you breaking that down. I find that so incredibly useful. Not only, I'm interested in all things business and workplace related, but also, I have this passion about helping individuals kind of find their passion and help them navigate through changes in life. And, so this has been very, very interesting. And I really appreciate you sharing that, because I see the value in that. And I would encourage people to really think more about how they can be more mindful and deliberate and purposeful about finding flow and being in that state. I know from your work, I remember the things that we talked about, when with Mentor Factor, when we used to meet and talk about that. I know the value of that from a leadership perspective. And of course, I'm always interested in those things, but I think that to the extent that an individual is able to take advantage of these tools and resources and these things that we can do, that is the degree to which then organizations and communities will function better, because it starts with the individual.
Exactly.
No company, or I don't care how big or small they are, none of that is going to happen until the individuals of which that entity is comprised are able to self-actualize and have their own flow moments and these pivotal moments and this change and this transition. You're not going to get a company there until you get your people there. So I really appreciate you sharing that on that level with me. Thank you so much. I'm looking at the time, and I know that we're coming to kind of our timeline here, but I did want to just ask you, in relation to just the pivot moment, what sort of support systems do you recommend that people have when they're navigating life changes and these pivotal moments?
My God, what an awesome question. And it is top of mind for me now.
Mm-hmm.
I've always been extremely ridiculously independent.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm interested in, like you, so many different things. But through my life, I have managed to build multiple communities around me that I didn't even know existed. I mean, I knew, but it wasn't necessarily a conscious thing that I was doing. It was about, I enjoyed doing this over here, so I would hang out with those people that did that thing. I got with the firefighters, and I'm just like absolutely in love with that profession. They are my heart, and they have become a community. And then in the technical communication world, and the leadership world, I have communities that I have developed over time. And so if it wasn't a conscious thing particularly, but I think when you're intentional, when you're young, in your 40s and your 30s or whatever, to start building networks of people. But you don't just build them, you contribute.
Yes.
You when I was in Texas, I did it to build my business, but I didn't just go to the meetings. I belong to DPMA and ASM and all these systems oriented groups and the Society for Technical Communication, and I was involved at the board level with many organizations. And I started the knowledge management forum in Dallas, Texas, because I was interested in looking at knowledge management, and there were a lot, and I gathered together like minds, and we developed this new group of people. So I have built community along the way, but as a result of this, now since my breast cancer has come back, I found myself in a situation where I was going to have to be helping myself by myself, and in my house. Now this is, my daughter is going to be with me for a week and a half after my surgery. And then she has a business trip she has to go on.
Right.
And I kind of freaked out because I'm not going to be able to cook. So I found an app online called Meal Train, and I said, okay, guys, here it is. I'm just putting it out. Oh my God, the support, the response has come. There were people that I didn't even know who were signing up to help me. And when I researched who they were firefighter wives.
Oh, and part of these communities that you've been building, and had no idea that how they could come full circle in the future to come back to serve you. That's so amazing. That's beautiful. So I wanted to touch on that.
That is my number one advice to people, is to give without expectation of return, and to practice loving kindness to everyone, and it will come back to you over time. But go ahead. I'm sorry, I interrupted.
And that is beautiful, and I'm so grateful that you added that component. And I wanted to just piggyback on that. And I wanted to say, despite how incredibly, extremely independent you might be, because when you led with that really struck a nerve with me, because I do believe that I agree with everything that you said. Studies have shown the value and the importance of community in preventing depression. And I'm an expat living in the Netherlands right now. And, that whole piece about community really is very relevant to me, especially since COVID, and, not being able to get back home, not being able to have my loved ones come and see me. It really, really did something to me.
Loneliness is an epidemic.
Right. I know. And so the importance of having that community. I mean, I had an incident here recently, a couple months ago, where it's funny now. It wasn't funny the night that it happened. I was out walking my dog, and I tripped and fell on the tram tracks. And hurt my leg and couldn't get up. And then the tram's coming, and then the dog's bouncing around, and I'm like, oh my God, like, and then what really struck me, the neighbors started looking like, what is going on down there? So then they came down, and they were like, is there anybody we can call? And that question, is there anybody we can call? I was immediately, well, no, there's nobody to call. I live alone. I'm a foreigner in this foreign. Yeah, I've got a close friend who lives nearby, but he wasn't home, and I don't know his number by heart. And I didn't want to call him in the middle of the freaking night. And I was embarrassed and humiliated. I'm out here laid out on the freaking tram. My dog's going crazy. Trams are cars coming by. And I'm like, oh, you crazy American lady who fell on the tram line and can't freaking. And then they called the police, and then the police called the ambulance. And then I came back into my apartment that evening, and I bawled my eyes out, and I was like, girl, you are so alone here. Like, you need to ramp up your community game. So what you're saying is really, really hitting home here, it's very important. But I wanted to contrast that against what you first said, being extremely independent. The bottom line is this: it doesn't matter how extremely independent, how capable, how intelligent, how skilled, how educated, how whatever, fill in the blank adjective we are. We all need community.
Each other.
We
Yes.
need each other, period.
Yes.
I don't care how much money you have. I don't care how many gadgets, how many whatevers you have.
Right.
You just cannot live without that.
Nope.
So thank you I will
So
take
that has become my number one mantra, is to, particularly on the pivot stuff, the midlife stuff. That's where to start building this. You see your children getting older and they're going to move out or whatever. You need to build that community, so a community of support. And I know a lot of people that do that very well. Some people do it through their church. Some people do it, volunteering, food kitchens and things like that. Whatever gets you in a flow state, that's what you want to do. I mean, I have a girlfriend that lives in Hilton Head who teaches. She's moved down there. She's retired, and she teaches. She was a technical writer, and she's my age, and she teaches elderly people how to use their computers so that they can talk to their grandkids on their iPads. And she loves it. It's just, there's no rule about how big or magnificent the activity is. It's whatever puts you in a flow state and helps other people.
Right.
So
that's really powerful. And before we end, I do have one final question, if I may. I know we have a couple more minutes? Okay. So I am really a big fan of these big talk question cards. So I'm just gonna pick one from random, and you just answer it for me real quick. These are kind of fun. I like to do these at the end. I'm just gonna grab one. You could just kind of tell me like, tell me like, okay, I'll just pick one.
Okay, just pick one.
All right. And that one, of course, is a non one. All right. Oh, here's a great one. What life lesson do you wish everyone was taught in school?
That's a really good. A lot of things went flying through my head when you said that. I think, from a practical standpoint, I think finances need to be taught in school. How to balance a checkbook, how to live your life, and how to take care of yourself financially. So that's one.
That's a great one.
But another one is idea of practicing loving kindness with each other. The world has become so mean-spirited now. It's global. It's not just the US. Just freaks me out as how people are doing things to each other that are for the sake of being mean. And I don't get it. I don't understand it. I just do not understand it. So how do we, we used to be taught that in sports, you have good sportsmanship and that kind of thing. And it kind of,
and the golden rule, what happened to the golden rule in school? Do unto others. And we could have a whole other conversation about that another time. I know that we're running out of time, but I love your answers. Absolutely agree with both of them. Finance is definitely needed. Especially in these particularly difficult economic times, and likewise, loving kindness, especially in these particularly difficult and divided times that we're living in. So I really appreciate that. I just am so grateful to have had the opportunity to speak with you today, Judy. I really enjoyed our conversation so thoroughly, and thank you for sharing your work with everyone. And I would love to share a link to your book if that's possible, and your mentor factor. So I would just say that I'll put a link to Judy's information in the description of this video for anyone who wants to learn more about her book and the work that she does. And Judy, do you have any parting words for us before we go?
Just live your life in love and flow.
I love it.
I wish that for everybody.
I'm totally aligned with that. And thank you so much. Again, this has been another episode of The Pivoting Wolf. And I want to thank Judy Glick-Smith for being our guest today. And I look forward to seeing you guys on the next episode. And until then, take very good care. Thank you so much.